The Effect of Parent Involvement on Early Childhood Education Behaviors by Carly Nichols. What does the literature show? Capella, McClary, McCormick, and O'Connor stated that school intervention studies show that efforts to improve student outcomes can be more effective when the family is involved. The EdSource research shows that even when the relationship between parent involvement and academic outcomes is not fully clear, there is evidence that it can positively affect students' behavior and social skills. Sheikh, Khalil, and Wong found that parents who conveyed the importance and value of education and discussed future plans with their students motivated them to engage in their academic work behaviorally and emotionally. This behavioral and emotional engagement led to higher achievement. Methodology. An action research study was conducted in which qualitative and quantitative data was collected. This study took place in a second grade classroom in a small Texas town. This study specifically addresses the following questions. Do students perform better academically when parents are involved in our daily school routines? Does parent involvement have a negative or a positive effect on how the student behaves in the classroom setting? Participants. The participants of this study includes 11 boys and 8 girls. Of the 19 students, 1 is in special education, 2 go to speech therapy, 1 receives 504 services, 5 receive reading intervention services, and 3 receive math intervention services. The special education student receives 2 hours of pull-out resource per day. The speech therapy students receive services once every other week for 45 minutes. The 504 student receives accommodations daily in the classroom. The reading and math intervention students receive 45 minutes of pull-out resource twice a week. Materials. This study uses the leveled readers from the Wonders ELAR curriculum that the district just adopted, and Saxon Phonics. Wonders provides weekly leveled readers for students to work on fluency and comprehension. The leveled readers are intended to be used in small group settings weekly for about 10 minutes per group. Saxon Phonics provides a strong phonemic awareness foundation. Each lesson spirals from material that was previously taught. It provides regular reviews and assessments. These lessons are intended to be taught to students daily for 45-minute long sessions. Also used was a teacher-created parent involvement survey for the students to complete. Procedures. Every Monday, a parent volunteer came into the classroom and pulled small groups to read the Wonders leveled readers. Every Friday, our parent volunteer came into the classroom and called students individually to test on the Saxon Phonics high-frequency words. Records were kept of how they performed on the test, as well as notes on each student's interactions with the volunteer. I also tracked the student's behavior when our volunteer was in the classroom through informal observation. Data collection. Qualitative data was collected to see how students feel about parents being involved in school. The students completed a parent involvement survey that was read aloud whole class. The survey consisted of questions about how the students feel about their parents being involved in school. Qualitative data was also collected from the small group reading sessions and the informal observation of student behavior. Quantitative data was collected from the Saxon Phonics high-frequency words assessment. This information was intended to show how students perform academically when parents are in the classroom. Data analysis. Week 1, students completed the parent involvement survey. On week 2, our volunteer pulled 5 groups to read the Wonders leveled readers. Overall, students were able to stay on task and were able to answer all of the comprehension questions. The following Friday, our volunteer pulled students individually to complete their Saxon Phonics high-frequency words assessment. Of the 19 students, only 5 scored a 100%. Many students struggled with the B and D letter sounds, and 2 students were unable to stay focused on the assessment. On week 3, our volunteer pulled students to read the Wonders Leveled Readers. This was the second week in the classroom pulling small groups. Of the 19 students, 9 were unable to stay focused. Students fidgeted in their seats, made noises, or had wandering eyes. The following Friday, our volunteer pulled students individually to complete their Saxon Phonics high-frequency words assessment. Of the 19 students, only 3 scored 100%. This session, all students stayed focused and were able to complete the task on hand. Several students struggled reading the words, but were on task. On week 4, our volunteer pulled students to read the Wonders Leveled Readers. This was her third week in the classroom working with small groups. Of the 19 students, 5 were unable to stay focused. 5 students were also unable to answer any of the comprehension questions asked after their small group was finished reading the story. As our volunteer pulled students for small groups, I noticed several students that weren't reading with her and were unable to stay focused on their morning work for the day. Students seemed more comfortable with her in the room, but very distracted. The following Friday, our volunteer pulled students one-on-one to read the week's Saxon Phonics high-frequency words. 4 students struggled staying on task. Several just wanted to have a conversation with our volunteer instead of reading the words. On week 5, our volunteer pulled students one-on-one to read that week's Saxon Phonics high-frequency words. This was the 4th week in the classroom. The note stated that the students worked harder this week than in the previous weeks. The students were able to get the words read without any distractions. 5 students still struggled academically reading the words, but there were no behavior issues. Our volunteer was unable to pull small reading groups that week due to a sick child. On week 6, our volunteer came to the classroom to work with small groups. Of the 19 students, 9 students struggled staying on task. The note stated that 9 off-task students were either flipping through the pages, talking, had wandering eyes, and weren't following along in the story, or were unable to stay seated. As our volunteer was pulling groups, the rest of the class was working on their morning work. Several students were able to stay focused and get their work completed. Others were too distracted and were unable to finish. The following Friday, our volunteer pulled students one-on-one to read that week's Saxon Phonics high-frequency words. The note stated that all 19 students were able to stay on task. 4 students struggled academically with the high-frequency words. With assistance from our volunteer, they were able to sound out the words that they struggled with. On week 7, our volunteer came and pulled students to read the Wonders Leveled Readers. This was the 6th and final week in the classroom working with small groups. Of the 19 students, 12 students struggled staying on task. The note stated that 3 of the reading groups were very chatty and off task. Even with constant reminders to continue reading, they struggled completing the task. The students that were not working with our volunteer were working on their morning work. They remained chatty the entire time our volunteer was in the classroom. The following Friday, our volunteer pulled students one-on-one to read that week's Saxon Phonics high-frequency words. The note stated again this week that all 19 students were able to stay on task. 3 students struggled academically, but were able to sound out the words with assistance. On week 8, the students completed the post-parent involvement survey. Findings. Most weeks there were several students who had trouble staying focused on the task at hand. Behaviorally and academically, the students struggled. By the end of the 6 weeks, the students made the realization that at least sometimes they felt distracted when parents are in the classroom. Students were given a pre- and post survey about how they feel about parent involvement in school. The figure below shows the comparison between the 2 surveys. On the question, I am on my best behavior when my parents are at school, for the pre-assessment, 68.4% said always. On the post-assessment, 57.9% said always. On the pre-assessment, 31.6% said sometimes, and on the post-assessment, 42.1% said sometimes. On the question, I feel distracted when parents are in the classroom, for the pre-assessment, 21.1% said yes. For the post-assessment, 31.6% said always. 26.3% said no on the pre-assessment, and 31.6% said never on the post-assessment. 52.6% said sometimes on the pre-assessment, and 36.8% said sometimes on the post-assessment. For the question, I am able to do my best work when parents are in the classroom, 55.6% said always on the pre-assessment, and 52.6% said always on the post-assessment. 38.9% said sometimes on the pre-assessment, 5.6% said never on the pre-assessment, and 47.4% said sometimes on the post-assessment. Discussion. As illustrated through the results, I would conclude that students do not perform better when parents are involved in our daily school routines. By the end of our 6 weeks, 68.4% of the class felt distracted at some point of having a parent present. 42.1% of the class thought they were only sometimes on their best behavior when parents were at school. Nearly half of the class's behavior was affected negatively by having a parent present.